Hey guys, I'm back. Page 233, middle of the page. Right where it said, it was too late to run. I'm in chapter 21. When Mr. Thorne smiled, she flinched, but she stood her ground. She was so scared that it hurt to breathe. Her corset felt like Satan's bony hand gripping her around her chest and squeezing her tight. Her limbs were hot with the burning drive to flee. But she mustn't. She mustn't, and she didn't. She had to stay. She took in a long, slow, deep breath. Then she turned her back to him and slowly walked away. She walked at what felt like a snail's pace down the corridor, pretending as though she had no idea who he was or that her life was in danger. Her back was to him now, so she could not see him anymore, but she could hear Mr. Thorne's footsteps following her, getting closer and closer behind her, so close that the hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. Unable to control her fear, her arms and hands began to tremble. His footsteps behind her pounded in her temples. There was no doubt in her mind that they were not the footsteps of a mortal man, but of the man in the black cloak. This was the soul stealer. This was the fiend who had taken Anastasia Rostonova, Clara Brahms, Nolan, the pastor's son, and countless others. And he was right behind her. She looked down the corridor at the small side door ahead of her. Just a few more steps, she thought, and she kept walking. 3 more steps. Slowly walking. 2 more steps. Finally, she slipped out the door in one quick movement and went out into the cold darkness of the night. Mr. Thorne followed her outside, pulling his billowing black cloak and hood up around his head and shoulders as he entered the night. As the snow fell gently from the moonlit sky, she ran across the grass and ducked into the rambles. The maze of twisting paths was a bewildering convolution of bushes and hedges, with dark shadows, blind corners, and dead ends. A place where the man in the black cloak had killed before. But she knew this place too. She knew it better than anyone. She moved swiftly through the maze. She imagined she'd see the ghost of Anastasia Rostonova searching the paths for her little white dog. The man in the black cloak followed her down one pathway after another. "Why are you running away from me, child?" he asked in a hideous, rispy voice. Too frightened to answer, she just kept moving. When she looked over her shoulder to see how much of a lead she'd gained, she saw him coming up behind her. In the long, flowing black cloak, he flew a foot off the ground, standing erect, his arms stretched out like a wraith, his huge, blood-stained hands reaching to grab her. Her breath caught in her throat so severely that she couldn't even scream. Terrified, she sprinted forward with a burst of speed. To stop was to die, and it was far too early to die. Seeing a hole in the bushes, she dove through it. She left the manicured paths of the rambles behind her and ran into the wild forest. Tearing through the underbrush, she made quick time. She ducked behind trees. She scurried into and through thickets. She delved into the deepest shadows of the forest. She ran and ran and ran, deep into the darkest night, her nemesis close on her tail. The thickness of the forest made it difficult for her pursuer. The trees grew so close together that an adult could barely squeeze between them. The spiny thickets were so bristling with thorns that they were nearly impenetrable. But with her smaller size and her agility, she could move easily, darting betwixt and between, scrambling below and leaping above. She moved as swift as a weasel through the brush. The forest was her ally. She was terrified that he'd catch her and kill her, but she didn't want to lose him completely either. When he fell behind or lost her trail in the snow, she slowed down to let him catch up. Deep into the woods she led him. She had studied the way and formed a map in her mind. But even with the shortcut she planned to take, they still had miles to go. Pretty clever, this Seraphina, huh? As she ran, she kept thinking about Braden, her pa, and the Vanderbilts. She kept thinking about what had happened to Clara, Anastasia, and Nolan. She had to defeat Mr. Thorne. She had to kill him. Her only chance lay ahead of her. She was out of breath and desperately tired. Her legs ached, and her lungs felt like she was breathing through steel wool. She wasn't sure how much farther she could run, but then she finally saw what she was running for. Gravestones. There were hundreds of them standing in the silver light of the moon beneath the bare branches of the gnarled old winter trees. This was the place that terrified her, but she knew she must come. She ran through the old cemetery. An eerie fog was rising among the twisted branches of the ancient trees and the decaying monuments of the dead. She looked behind her. The man in the black cloak flew toward her out of the mist, his bloody hands reaching for her. Ew. Seraphina ran with all her heart. She dashed past Cloven Smith, the murdered man. She leapt over the two sisters laying side by side. She raced through the 66 Confederate soldiers. She arrived, finally, panting and exhausting, at the small glade with the statue of the winged angel. Seraphina could hear the man in the black cloak crashing through the brush behind her. She had only seconds before he had arrived. Fear flooded through her veins. She became sickeningly aware that she was bringing two great forces together, and she was between them. From one direction or another, there was a good chance the death would soon be upon her. She ran to the edge of the moonlit glade where the old willow lay with its upturned roots. The thick trunk and heavy branches of the fallen master of the forest swirled with ghostly mist. Its delicate leaves, somehow still growing bright green in the winter, glistened with the starlight. Praying that the great yellow-eyed prowler of the night was out hunting, Seraphina found the hole in the ground beneath the roots. She dropped down onto her hands and knees and crawled into the mountain lion's den. She came face to face with two spotted cubs who stared at her with large, frightened eyes as she moved between them. "Where's your mama?" she asked them. When the cubs saw that it was her, they jumped up in relief. They moved toward her, smelling her and rubbing themselves on her body. She crawled past the two cubs and curled into a little ball in the earthen den. Now the trap was laid. Just as she had done when she crawled inside the machine in the Biltmore's basement, she made herself very still and very quiet. She steadied her lungs and her heart. She shut her eyes and concentrated, extending her senses outward toward the forest. "I know you're out there someplace, hunting your domain. Where are you? Your cubs are in danger." Seraphina could feel it. Out there in the darkness of the woods, beyond the graveyard, the mother lion paused in her hunting. She tilted her head at the sound of the two intruders in her forest. Her forest. Her cubs were in danger. She turned and charged back toward her den with all her speed. The man in the black cloak came into the angel's glade and looked around. "Where have you led me, dear child?" he said, trying to figure out which direction Seraphina had gone. He circled the stone pedestal of the moss-covered angel. "Do you think you can hide from me, little rabbit?" he asked. "I'm not a rabbit," Seraphina thought fiercely. For a brief moment, she felt a sensation of triumph because it seemed like her plan was going to work. Then the man in the black cloak would be left standing helplessly in the angel's glade. He would have no idea where she'd gone. She had disappeared. She had escaped him. But then she remembered the snow. She had not accounted for the snow. Her tracks led straight to her hiding place. The tracks would betray her. Let's pause right there because this video is getting a little long. I'm on page 239, and I'll come back in just a few minutes, okay? I'm going to stop this video right here.